Hello everyone, this is Zero's Trivia, and welcome back to part 7 of our Guandu Let's Talk lore series titled Turning Point. In our last episode, we ended as Cao Cao and Yuan Shao's army faced off at Guandu, and after 3 months of sieging, neither side was thrilled with the results. Yuan Shao was frustrated with the lack of progress, while Cao Cao was worried about his dwindling supplies as the prolonged siege at Guandu continued. Now, to be fair, both sides did try to create new fronts, as they hoped to find opportunities to break this stalemate at Guandu. And in our last episode, we already mentioned how Cao Cao focused on supply lines, as he sent Xu Huang and Shi Huan to raid Yuan Shao's, while reinforcing his own by asking Ren Jun to double down the protection. But even though Cao Cao was largely successful on both fronts, Yuan Shao's food supply still dwarfed that of Cao Cao's, as Yuan Shao even was able to send Chun Yuqiong back to the north to gather up another year worth of supplies, as the siege at Guandu seemed to have no end in sight. And even though Cao Cao's supply lines were protected and untouched, the amount of food he could stockpile from his land were severely limited, as the Yan and Yu provinces were both dealing with numerous rebellions, as many local officials rallied to Yuan Shao's banner. So by October of 200, Cao Cao only had 1 month of supply remaining, with little hopes of future resupplies. Now, to make this situation even worse, one of these regional uprisings would also manage to make contact with Yuan Shao, as Runan's Yellow Turban leader Liu Pi wrote a letter in August to Yuan Shao asking for reinforcement and aid. Seizing upon this opportunity with hopes of opening up a second front against a already overstretched Cao Cao, Yuan Shao ordered Liu Bei to sneak his men south and join up with Liu Pi in Runan. Forced to respond, Cao Cao gambled once again, as he decided to split up his ready tiny force at Guandu by handing over the command of all his cavalry units to Taurian, hoping that it could bring a swift end to the uprising in Yuan Shao's hometown of Runan. And indeed, Taurian did not disappoint, as Liu Bei and Liu Pi's disorganized forces were soon routed. But Taurian's mission would not end here, as Yuan Shao had sent yet another unit led by General Han Xun to reinforce Liu Bei and launch a raid on Xuchang from the west by looping around Guandu through the mountain ranges south of Luoyang. Once again, Taurian would prove his worth, as his cavalry, without taking any rest, rushed to stop Han Xun's raid right after ending Liu Pi's uprising in Runan. The two forces would meet at a mountain range called Mount Jiluo, as Taurian would defeat Han Xun's forces before making a timely return back to Cao Cao at Guandu. And with Han Xun's defeat, Yuan Shao would give up on the idea of looping around through the mountainous terrains south of Luoyang, as those mountain roads were both too difficult to traverse and too easy for Cao Cao to ambush. But just because Liu Bei and Liu Pi failed to open up this new front against Cao Cao in Runan, does not mean that the southern front was a dead end, as soon after returning to Yuan Shao's camp, Liu Bei, who now saw no future serving under Yuan Shao, decided to volunteer to sneak south once again past Cao Cao's lines, as he promised Yuan Shao that he can use his royal lineage to help convince fellow Han loyalty, Liu Biao, into mobilizing his forces in the Jin province to attack Cao Cao from the rear. Now, tempted by this potential of alliance with Liu Biao, Yuan Shao agreed, but this was going to be the last time Yuan Shao would actually see Liu Bei, as Liu Bei had no intentions of returning to Yuan Shao, nor was he keen on brokering an actual alliance for Yuan Shao. Instead, Liu Bei planned to regroup with the remaining Yellow Turban forces in Runan, now commanded by Guandu, as he hoped to seek shelter under Liu Biao, as after observing Yuan Shao for nearly a year, Liu Bei no longer believed Yuan Shao would be able to win against Cao Cao. Now, if you're interested in continue the story of Liu Bei from here, I highly recommend the Trivia Let's Talk Lore series. But staying on topic for this series, we need to return to Guandu, where despite Cao Cao's successes in stopping Yuan Shao's advances, the situation did not look great in October of 200. With only 1 month of food supplies remaining, Cao Cao needed a miracle, and that miracle's name would be Xu Yu. Now, Xu You had known Cao Cao since they were both kids, as Cao Cao, Xu You, and Yuan Shao all attended the government school of Taixue together, where they would become close friends. And from a young age, Xu You was a radical opportunist, as in 184, he was rash enough and bold enough to get himself involved in an assassination plot to kill Emperor Liu Hong. And just so you understand how close Xu You was with Cao Cao, Xu You not only trusted Cao Cao enough to tell him about the plot, but he also tried to recruit Cao Cao to take part in it. Now, Cao Cao obviously declined, with a bright political future ahead of himself, and when the plot had failed, Xu You went into hiding for a period of time before eventually re-emerging a few years later as a confidant of Yuan Shao, who was tomb guarding for his parents at the time. Then in 189, when Dong Zhuo took over, Xu You fled the capital alongside Yuan Shao, and from that point on, Xu You would continue to serve under Yuan Shao as an advisor. However, right around this time, Xu You received some bad news from his family back in Ye. Apparently, Yuan Shao's general Shen Pei, who was entrusted with the defense of the city, and a political enemy of Xu You, had imprisoned a few members of Xu You's family, accusing them of breaking the law. Outraged by this attack on his family, and knowing that Shen Pei had two sons who are currently serving in Yuan Shao's army here at Guandu, Xu You once again responded in the most radical manner possible, as he decided to turncoat against Yuan Shao and try his luck with his old friend Cao Cao. So in the middle of the night, Xu You would sneak out of Yuan Shao's camp and make his way to Cao Cao. Now, according to a slightly less reliable source, it was said that Cao Cao was so elated to see his old friend that he got out of bed and, without even putting on shoes, dashed on outside to greet Xu You in person. And as these two friends got down to business, Xu You asked Cao Cao how much food and supplies he had remaining. Now, slightly unsure of Xu You's intentions with his midnight visit, Cao Cao lied and claimed that he had a year worth of supply. Unhappy with Cao Cao's lie, Xu You asked again how much food and supplies he had remaining. Still uncertain of Xu You's intentions, Cao Cao lied again and claimed that he actually had only 6 months of food and supplies remaining. But knowing that Cao Cao's food and supplies were stretched thin, Xu You, slightly running out of patience, asked Cao Cao once again, "If you really want my help to defeat Yuan Shao, then why lie to me?" Finally, taking a leap of faith, Cao Cao laughed and told Xu You, "All kidding aside, I only have enough food and supplies for this month." Pleased with Cao Cao's sincerity, Xu You then went on to inform Cao Cao that given his situation of having less men and almost no food, with no one coming to help, his only hope is to strike Yuan Shao's food supplies to force Yuan Shao to retreat. And he happens to know that Chun Yuqiong and 10,000 men, along with over a year worth of supplies, are currently stationed at Wuchao. Hearing this, Cao Cao immediately summoned his officers in the middle of the night as he decided to trust Xu You's surrender entirely. Instructing his cousin Cao Hong and his advisor Xun You to hold down the camp at all costs, Cao Cao ordered all the other officers to come with him and Xu You, along with only 5,000 men, which represented a little less than half of Cao Cao's total forces at Guandu, which was estimated to be around 12,000 men. And with Xu You's help, along with a few of Yuan Shao's banners confiscated from the sieges before, Cao Cao would order his army to disguise themselves as Yuan Shao's unit, reinforcing Wuchao, as they were able to march past countless night patrols along their way to Wuchao without raising any alarm. Arriving just before dawn, Cao Cao ordered his men to surround the sleepy and unsuspecting camp as they first lit up the entire perimeter of the camp before charging in to finish off the enemy. And with no warning and still asleep, Chun Yuqiong's forces were slaughtered indiscriminately as Generals Sui Yuanjin, Han Zhuzi, Lu Weihuang, and Zhao Rui were all killed in their sleep. But even with the element of surprise, killing off over 10,000 men and burning more than a year's worth of food and supplies for over 100,000 strong army will take some time. So that meant not long after Cao Cao's assault had started, a few of those night patrols within Chun Yuqiong's army did manage to escape back to Yuan Shao's camp at Yangwu, as news of this raid reached Yuan Shao, and a decision needed to be made right away. Inside Yuan Shao's camp, Zhang He spoke up first, as he suggested reinforcing Chun Yuqiong immediately, as the report suggested that Cao Cao is personally leading the raid, thus reinforcing Chun Yuqiong not only could save the food and supplies at Wuchao, but also give them a chance at capturing Cao Cao. However, just as Zhang He finished his sentence, Guo spoke up and suggested a different plan, as he believed because Cao Cao was at Wuchao, this meant that the majority of Cao Cao's forces at Guandu must also be at Wuchao. Therefore, this was actually their best chance at attacking and taking a thinly defended Guandu. Plus, Guo argued that the supply depot is probably already lost at this point, but if they manage to take Guandu, then Cao Cao's army will be cut off from Xuchang and trapped among Yuan Shao's forces on all three sides. And of course, with the increasing reliance on Guo following Zhu Shuo's fall from grace, Yuan Shao would ignore Zhang He's suggestion as he went along with Guo's plan. But with very few officers still at his disposal following the death of Yanliang and Wen Chou, Yuan Shao actually ended up turning to Zhang He and Gao Lan to execute this plan that they had disagreed on, as they were now forced to go to Guandu and try to siege it down. Now, we know that Guandu is not thinly defended, as Cao Cao only took less than half of his army to attack Wuchao, knowing full well that he was going to be outnumbered at least 2-1 at Wuchao, precisely because he knew he could not afford to lose Guandu. So in the early mornings of this October day in the year 200, Zhang He and Gao Lan and Cao Cao's forces at Wuchao unknowingly entered into a race against each other, as the first one to take down their target would finally gain the upper hand in the Battle of Guandu. And with this, we're going to be ending our episode here, as we will wrap up the Battle of Guandu next time and discuss some of the lasting impact from this campaign. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you all in the finale tomorrow. Bye!